Thank you very much for inviting me. This talk that I'm going to give, I assume I am among friends, because it's not my field. However, I did just finish a book with Sam Bowles that has a lot of anthropology in it, but also a lot of social psychology and sociology and economics and biology. Because we believe that if you want to understand a particular question, you have to follow it wherever it takes you in terms of scientific material, and it cannot be limited by discipline. So we take seriously that this requires a interdisciplinary explanation. Now, I also wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Bounds of Reason, which really is a long argument, mostly from within economic theory, of why you need the unification of the behavioral sciences. Now, what this means, if you believe in it, is that we should be able to do unified social science. Now, why is that possible now? Well, I argue that it's possible now because of the internet, because of the informational and social changes that have occurred since the emergence of the internet. It makes me possible to take on a new issue within weeks, to have almost all the material I could possibly want to answer the question about that area, often days. I can ask a question and get papers right away, immediately, that help me answer this question. It used to take weeks to do that, to get the material. Weeks. And so you wouldn't ask the right questions because you know it's going to take you 3 weeks before you got the material to answer it. And by that time you'd be on to something else. You forgot what you were interested in back then. Second, I can test my ideas against experts, because I can email someone who knows a lot about an area, and I can say, what do you think of this idea? Or do you have some references for me on this? Or you know somebody who's working on this? This used to take years. It took years before people found out what you were working on. Now you can do it in days. So what I'm going to present to you is really a little exercise in following that path of using the internet to answer interdisciplinary questions. 2 months ago, I don't think, everything I know about this, I mean, except for, undergraduate level material, I learned in the past 2 months. And I did check what I'm going to talk about against very famous people like Chris Bohm, anthropologist Polly Wiesner, Peter, Rob Boyd, Joan Silk, Ronald Chappé, and on and on. Not on and on, about 7 or 8 people. Okay, so here's a summary of what I'm going to talk about. Please stop me if you have questions. There's a brilliant article published recently, but basically the common ancestor of great apes and humans lived in what are called multi-male, multi-female groups, in which social dominance is based on physical prowess, the so-called alpha male, and rather crude alliance building. That is, subordinate males could challenge the alpha male, but only very sporadically and only with limited success. Human hunter-gatherers, the primitive state of our species until some 10,000 years ago, practiced, and that should be a D, and this is slightly contentious, but I'll just claim it for a fact, reverse dominance hierarchy, which is a term invented by Christopher Bohm, he used in his book Hierarchy in the Forest, in which he argued, after studying 357 extant hunter-gatherer societies and winnowing out the ones that had some modern institution that would make them very unlike our hunter-gatherer ancestors, such as some horticulture, some trade with a developed economy, some form of wealth, such as horses. So without any of those. And they all had the same internal organization, which was there was always a tendency for young men to try to take over, to bully, to kill, to threaten, And this was countered by what he called reverse dominance hierarchy. The people in the village would get together and they'd talk about it, and they would reprimand him. And if he didn't listen, they'd kill him. And there's many examples of this. So these societies are not societies with leaders that control. There are no alpha males in these societies. They're big men, but the big men have no power other than what they can get by a persuasion and influence. There's a great book about modern bureaucracy written by Chester Barnard called The Functions of the Executive. And he says this, very important fact about leadership. He said, a leader never gives an order that will be disobeyed. In other words, to be a leader, you have to always think about what can you get away with? What can you ask that will be obeyed and what will not? And how do you get people to obey your orders? Because in the classical Weberian theory of bureaucracy is just a bunch of rules. Everybody obeys the rules. Your boss tells you what to do, you do it. It's a rule. Weber was profoundly wrong about understanding complex social organizations, even ones with ostensible hierarchies. Okay. Now in reverse dominance hierarchy, the primate predisposition to control remains, but it's countered by widespread egalitarian practices. The move from hierarchy to egalitarian political structure was due to the development of lethal weapons. This is my hypothesis. It's not even really in Burm's book. So this is what I came to from reading this literature. Lethal weapons permitted even the weakest male to kill even the strongest would-be alpha male at very low personal cost. You kill somebody when they're asleep or when they turn their back. No big deal. Now, how big and strong you are, you're not worth anything if somebody's got a spear with a poison on the point or a big rock and can hit you while you're asleep. By the way, if a chimp tries to hurt another chimp while he's asleep, he can hurt him, they wake him up, and then they have to fight. You can't kill him. You can't even come close. Humans today exhibit both egalitarian political values, democracy, self-determination, personal dignity, and the capacity to survive in predatory political hierarchies based on arbitrary force. In other words, we've conserved the capacity to operate in these hierarchies based on force because we share a lot with our chimpanzee and other primate relatives. We're capable of doing it, but we don't like it. Humans cannot be socialized to accept predatory political hierarchies, although they can be cowed into submission when the possibility of overturning despotic rulers seems remote. On the centrality of the cost of punishment, by the way, the thing about lethal weapons is, once you have a lethal weapon, you have a very low-cost form of punishing people you don't like, as long as you get them first. And this comes from a lot of work that we did in basically mathematical biology. Paul Bingham was the first to really emphasize the importance of low-cost punishment in a brilliant article he did in 1999 in the Quarterly Review of Biology. But then, actually I did know Bingham's work. I argued this in a paper I did in the year 2000, Strong Reciprocity in Human Sociality. It comes out quite clearly from the math that if the cost of punishing is high, you can't get this pro-social behavior to evolve. And then Peter, as well as Boyd, well, I don't have any, there's no arrow here, I'm sorry. We came to the same conclusion in a paper in 2003, and even more recently, we have another paper. So the cost of punishment is very important, and it's being low, and also being able to coordinate punishment. Bingham stressed that, but we stress that as well. Still summary. The emergence of settled trade in agriculture around 10,000 years ago gave rise to novel forces of hierarchical dominance. In other words, it's a reappearance from the the pre-hominid stage, a reappearance of hierarchy. The predatory state with a monopoly on the means of coercion. And the power of this state is based on cavalry or other high-cost means of enforcement. Swords, steel, etc. Now we're talking much later, 10,000 years, 8,000 years ago. The next stage, which I'll talk about, is the development of the handgun and rifle after the 16th century in Europe. And this gave preeminence to the infantry in warfare, the foot soldier. And all of modern democracy is based on the preeminence of the foot soldier, I claim. The handgun, the rifle. You can kill a guy on a horse. The guy with all the mail, you know, and the big thick sword going out, you're gone. Okay, so this led to the replacement of elite and mercenary armies, small armies of very highly skilled individuals, with mass armies whose loyalty depended on their feeling part of the state, that is patriotism. Classically, peasants and non-elites did not feel patriotism wherever they lived. The strong guy was the enemy. He's the guy who came and collected the taxes from you. But all of a sudden, around the 18th century, with the preeminence of light, portable, lethal weapons in the form of handguns and rifles and etc., all of a sudden, loyalty and patriotism became the key to a successful military presence, and that gives us modern political democracy. Still summary, the fate of political freedom has been based throughout history and prehistory on the character of lethal weapons. It remains to be seen if some other force, such as information, can replace lethal weapons as the basis for political emancipation in the future. Look how fast military technology is changing now with drones and God knows what's going on. All of those, I argue, all of those changes in military technology can severely undermine or promote political emancipation, freedom, equality, democracy, and all that stuff. As soon as you have a despot who's capable of controlling the masses by putting little things in their head that go off when you think the wrong thing or gosh knows what, our idea of political organization is going to be just as dead as the chimpanzee alpha male organization. I doubt it. In other words, I think we're going to have to continue. We have to think more in the future about how we develop lethal weapons in a way that maintain the preeminence of individuals over elites, or else we will probably succumb in over the next some number of years. Now, that's a summary. Okay, now, very recently in Nature, there's a beautiful article that studying many primate groups, hundreds of primate groups, made the argument that the multi-male, multi-female primate group, which coalesced about 52 million years ago, was the basis for the branching out of all the political organizations of primates since then. In these groups, mating is promiscuous, and males form a hierarchical power structure based on force. By the way, there are studies that show that the alpha male does in fact sire, in some, there's not good enough evidence, but in the one study I really know of, is very careful, 1/3 to 2/3 of offspring are sired by the alpha male, depending on circumstances. And the alpha male changes over every 4 years or so. In these societies, individuals know their mothers, but they don't know their fathers. There's no such thing as fatherhood. There's no family except matrilineal. You know your brothers and sisters, but you don't know your fathers. You're not provisioned by your fathers. There's no pair bonding. Obviously, it's promiscuous. And all non-human primates who live in multi-male, multi-female groups have exactly this, or approximately this living pattern. Now that's not all, because they're branching out. For instance, orangutans are solitary, baboons live with harems, one male with many females, and several subordinate children of various ages. But when they live multi-male, multi-female, as they do in bonobos and chimps, and many others, and monkeys, many monkey species, this is how they live. Now, once you get lethal weapons, this cannot persist. Now here I want to differ from the way anthropologists think, because I'm an economist. I'm saying this logically, not because I went back 2 million years and collected some bones that showed that the lethal weapons destroyed the alpha-male hierarchy system, because you wouldn't believe how sparse the evidence is on anything except bones and teeth. In fact, most of what we know about human evolution is from teeth. There are whole species and whole branches of the hominid tree that are known only because of a tooth they found somewhere. A slight overstatement, but not too bad. I'm saying this is logically necessary. And also, it did happen. But it's not an accident it didn't happen. It had to happen. Now, this is just some detail. Primates are capable of tool use. We all know that. And they throw stones. However, they don't manufacture tools. I mean, they may strip off, some leaves to get a stick to find termites, but they don't manufacture tools. They don't sharpen stones. They don't fashion spears. They don't use poison arrows. Probably poison arrows go way, way back. You can see how easy it is, one of your kids eats a bug and dies. You say, well, that's a nasty bug. Let's get some of it and give it to our enemies. It's the next step. So probably there have been poison darts for a very long time, although obviously we wouldn't have evidence of that. And they don't combine disparate materials. I mean, hominids for years, they have half the tools, wood and stone. How do you fit them together? How do you get the idea of fitting them together? They don't just fit together. You need to use pitch, and you have to have some glue and the straps and this and that. These are very, very, very sophisticated tools. Now, moreover, humans, the hominid line developed to be bipedal. Why that happened? Well, the story about the moving to the savannah and this and that. The point is, humans no longer needed to use their hands for anything. They could evolve completely new uses for hands. That is not true of other primates, because they're knuckle walkers. And by the way, you may say, well, they didn't really use their knuckles a lot. Well, whenever you're fleeing away from somebody, you're there knuckling away. And you can't evolve away so you don't use your knuckles because, it's predator avoidance. There are other animals that use their hands. For instance, have you ever seen a squirrel or a raccoon? They're very good. But they still have to run like hell to get away from predators. So they can't develop their musculature. They can't change the skeletal structure in a way which is useful for being really bipedal, and especially for throwing stuff. And basically for throwing stuff. Humans have a whole musculature around the torso. And the shape of the elbow and shoulder that are made exactly for very accurate throwing. Now, not everybody is, a major league pitcher, but we're all pretty good at that, and we evolved that because of bipedality. So chimps and these other animals, they cannot kill by means of lethal weapons. They can't really hurt much of anything. They're spastic. Even when sound asleep, an accosted male chimpanzee reacts by awakening, and then they fight. And read about it. Richard Wangham, in a wonderful book called Demonic Males, he recounts several instances where 3 or 4 male chimpanzees viciously attack another male for 20 minutes. They corner him from another troop. By the way, chimpanzees do not fight one-on-one with outsiders from another troop of chimpanzees. They'll never do that. But if they get 3 or 4 together, and they can isolate one of the other troop, they'll kill him, or they'll fight him, but not one-on-one. And by the way, among primates or even mammals, or even vertebrates, there's no example, except humans, of groups from different tribes or different groups fighting each other in pitched battles, many against many. Okay, there are in ants, but not in any vertebrate. Only humans fight one group against each other, like you saw the San, the Cavalry San, fighting in Peter's talk. So they will attack a male, but they'll attack him for 20 minutes, biting and scratching, and he's still alive. He's not dead yet. Then they go away, and usually the male will die. But it's very hard to kill a chimp. They're really strong, and even 4-on-1 with 20 or 25 minutes of sustained attack, you haven't killed them. They have no lethal weapon. And they will pick up stones and throw them, or sticks. At any rate, that's the story. Now, what about hominid lethal weapons? Hominids split off from the primate branch about 5-7 million years ago, were bipedal 4 million years ago. Well, I've talked about this. And they engaged, we know from the shape of the skeleton, and changes in skeletal shape, that they were good at thrusting, probably even 3 million years ago, although thrusting used wooden tools, wooden spears, and they would disappear. The earliest spears known are 400,000 years ago. But this probably goes back another million years. Tool manufacture's 2 million years old. And as soon as you get tool manufacture, you've got your lethal weapons, because you sharpen stones and the like. Okay. I won't give you you can read on the evidence on this, what I said about the skeletal changes leading up to the ability to throw accurately. By the way, Calvin has argued for a long time that humans are unique in possessing the neural machinery for connecting the psychomotor actions with perception so that you can throw accurately. You can't throw accurately by using slow adjustment processes in the mind. It has to be very fast reflex actions, which we're genetically predisposed to carry out. Okay, what about primate social power, which I mentioned? The alpha male is not a leader, but just a surplus extractor. There's lots we do not know about chimpanzee and monkey, multi-male, multi-female societies. There's lots we don't know about. I don't even really think we understand why they aggregated the groups the way they do with such complex social relations. Why aren't they like fish? Fish school, and that's predatory avoidance or defense against predators, but they don't have complex internal relations with hierarchies and fights and coalitions. Why do monkeys have it? And especially, why do apes? We don't know. But there's certainly not groups like human hunter-gatherers where they have to make collective decisions and they have to coordinate their behaviors in complex ways. The alpha leader just sits there and takes the surplus if he can get it. But as soon as you get lethal weapons, of course, as I say, this form of political organization goes away. But what happened, and this again is parallel, hominids probably moved in many, many different ways to try to deal with changing environmental conditions, especially climatic conditions. But the only really successful way was to become highly cooperative and very flexible in dealing with rapid environmental changes by changing social organization. Other forms of hunter-gatherers, Australopithecines, etc., tried different things and became extinct. But this really worked. But that requires a political leadership. You can use the lethal weapons to get rid of the predatory alpha male. But you still need some form of political organization to get the coordination to behave flexibly the way hominid societies had to do in order to survive. So they needed some basis for leadership other than force. The solution was democratic and egalitarian political structure, reverse dominance hierarchy. If you want to be a leader, you had to be skilled, talented, intelligent. You had to be able to form coalitions. You had to have a theory of mind so you understood what other people are thinking. You had to be a flexible, modern leader who has no power. They can't fire you. If you overstep your bounds, they'll tell you you can't, they'll ostracize you for a period of time, and etc. So it requires a new level of social intelligence. On the other hand, there's no doubt but that those who did have these features, intelligence and ability to lead, and had acquired influence, and this probably led to higher fitness. They had more offspring. They had better mates, more high-quality mates, and their offspring lived longer. And that's why we have big brains. That's why we have language, etc. Because there's a real net benefit to having high-quality leadership and high-quality information processing. So over time, that gets rewarded. And this is, by the way, an example of gene-culture coevolution. The culture is you have a high... Yeah.
Is there evidence to those 2 points in that last bullet?
No. There's certainly evidence that individuals that exhibit those qualities have extra pair copulations and have more offspring, etc. today. That is, you see what I'm saying? That's often considered to be, what do you call it, sexual selection? Females like... Well, the best example I can give is Magic Johnson. No, there's not. Or look, maybe Peter knows the evidence.
Well, I mean, we know that that living hunter-gatherers have this kind of pattern, and it does seem that as you say, that men who are persuasive, one of the things that they often do seem to have more access to women. So that the Ache are interesting. They have this South American partible paternity idea that a child can have many fathers, sort of in proportion to the amount of times the mother copulated with guys. So one of the things this leads to is that these leaders tend to have high prestige, and they tend to be the partial fathers of many children.
Right.
This is a system that's unique to a small corner of South America, but as Herb says, even if you don't have very many women, you're going to tend to get the best women if you're in these positions, and so there is an ongoing sexual selection. I think I don't think there's much doubt about it.
Right, but the fact is, almost everything I'm saying is, as far as I know, completely compatible with all the evidence we have. But it's hardly enough to iron it down. I mean, we just don't have enough evidence. So this is, it's not just so stories, because again, it's almost logically necessary. By the way, one of the alternatives to this is, again, sexual selection theory. People say we have big brains because old females like people who could dance and sing and sweet talk, etc. And that seems to me to be bizarre from the point of view of population biology, because the cost of the brain is so immense. We use 17% of our caloric total calories just to operate our brain. The typical mammal is like 4%. and small mammals is 1%, you know. So it's some form of sexual selection which would be purely arbitrary based on preference is pretty absurd.
But it really does seem like a just so story.
Well, it's not a just so story.
Saying that the more intelligent individuals are the ones who held power.
Oh no, not if you can't use force. I think it's quite reasonable, although I agree that I think all these are testable, but I wouldn't call it a just so story.
But Herb, isn't it the case that all you need for a lethal weapon is to find a log that looks like a modern baseball bat with maybe even a little bit greater weight and the physical strength to be able to strike it one blow and knock somebody out while they're asleep? And I would think that that technology is so primitive that the lethal weapons must have existed almost from day one, let's say day two.
No, they don't. Well,
You
go.
just need to be strong and have a log.
Well, I'll let you go look at the evidence. I maintain what I said by having looked at that evidence. It's not true in contemporary primate societies that animals can kill each other with weapons. They do not do that. They do not wield weapons against each other, and they don't kill each other that way. And you cannot do it with a log. They are too big. You can't kill the guy. He'll wake up, and then you have to fight, etc., etc. So at any rate, I don't want to get into that because it's a rather technical issue.
It seems like they're pretty important.
Yeah, it's very important. But the fact is that it's not done in other animals. Animals that live in groups that are capable of killing each other are humans.
It's like a problem in the argument. That is to say, if the technology of a lethal weapon existed really early, it's just need a log, but they don't use it.
No, it doesn't. You can't kill. If you take a great big log and go up to a chimp and whack it with a log.
I can't do it, but a strong.
No, chimps don't even have the coordination to do it. They can barely take a stone and break open a nut. That's a major advance in tool use for chimps. They're just not good at throwing. They don't deal with each other that way. That's all I can say. And no other. By the way, notice that when you have animals that live in groups, they can't kill each other except for humans. Snakes don't live in groups, the ones that can, poison each other. Rams, sheep live in groups, and the rams have horns. But what direction do the points of the horns go? They point back. So they can't kill each other. How did that evolve? That's how, by the way, modern evolutionary game theory developed in Maynard Smith, Price, and others, which was, how do you explain why they have the points going backward if they're rams? It's so they cannot kill each other because there's a Nash equilibrium in which they fight but they don't kill each other. So humans are the only species I know of where they can really kill each other and they live in groups. At any rate, let me just move on because that's the best I can do. So persuasion depends on social cognition, linguistic facility, Cyrano de Bergerac, all that kind of stuff. Now, this is the opposite of Machiavellian intelligence, which is a beautiful idea developed by Byrne and Whitten a long time ago, who said, why are apes so smart? They're much smarter than monkeys, for instance. Well, they have Machiavellian intelligence. They get more offspring with all these brains. But the argument I'm making is that it's not Machiavellian, it's pro-social leadership ability. It really contributes to the survival value of the group. It's not just another predatory mechanism for getting more offspring. So hunter-gatherer life favored progressive cephalization and the evolution of language. 2 million years of evolution and the presence of lethal weapons gives rise to us. Maybe that's an answer to Larry's question, where did genes come in? Well, genes come in because our genes are the product of our lethal weapon cultures. Because we had to find other ways of coordinating our behavior and getting prestige and fitness without killing each other. Okay, and by the way, the next stage, cephalization, is followed by neoteny. Neoteny means that we're born way before our brains are fully developed, because otherwise we couldn't fit through the female birth canal. So human babies are born very, very infantile and incapable of taking care of themselves, and therefore they need lots of care. Well, how do you do this? There's only one way. There are two ways. This again is theory, right? Simon will say, is there evidence for that? Yes, there's evidence for all of this. Neoteny requires either communal child provisioning, that is, if you're not pregnant, you help, or you don't have very young offspring right now, you help those who do. Because there's the amount of care that's required for these neotenous young is orders of magnitude greater. A female chimp almost does not, the only form of feeding that a female chimp gives to her offspring is milk. Other than that, they're out for themselves. Doesn't even share food any more than with anybody else. So you get either communal child provisioning or pair bonding, where the males start contributing to the nurturing of the offspring, and both of those occurred. And by the way, there's wonderful papers by Hilly Kaplan, the anthropologist at University of New Mexico, and his co-authors as to exactly how strong this reverse caring for children over an extended period of time. Children in hunter-gatherer societies, and Neoteny and others, children continue to be net recipients of calories until they're 20 years old, and even older, right? Of course, in the United States, people now live at home until they're 35, so that's nothing new. Both occurred. Sarah Blaffer-Hurdy argues that in her book Mothers and Others that communal child rearing is the first really human social process. And others of the kinship, by pair bonding does not mean monogamy, because it's compatible with monogamy, polygamy, or polygyny. It just means you have pairs. And the males are responsible for nurturing all of the children of those to whom they're paired. That's pair bonding. It's mostly monogamy, if you look on average, but the others do occur. Okay, I already did that. Now, I'm going to go fast through the rest because you might not find it as interesting. As soon as you get settled agriculture and private property, you could counter the effect of lethal weapons by just getting a coterie of guards that protect you while you're sleeping from people who want to kill you. All of a sudden, you're back into hierarchy based on private property, based on settled agriculture and trade and property. And so the state, which of course does not exist in any other primate, then can emerge as an instrument for exploiting direct producers based on the ability to form coalitions and pay people to protect you from the people you're exploiting. Now, by the way, states also do something else, which is they protect the people that they exploit from other exploiters. And that can be important. Like in the Middle Ages, the Saracens and the Norsemen would come around and try to expropriate from the farmers, and the feudal states would protect the farmers against the marauders from outside. So it's both protection, but it's really protecting your source of extraction of surplus. The power of states peaked in the 13th century, but was driven back by a series of European population decimating plagues. So really, the states did not achieve their 13th century eminence again until the 18th century, really. And this new eminence was based on cavalry. Heavily armed cavalry, knights in shining armor. Aristotle writes, there are 4 kinds of military forces: the cavalry, the heavy infantry, light armed troops, and the navy. When the country is adapted for cavalry, a strong oligarchy is likely to be established. In other words, if the way you fight is the use of heavy cavalry, then you're going to have a political oligarchy running the country. Or the causation could go the other way around. Similarly, heavy infantry, again, the rich run things because they're the only ones that can afford the weapons. Light-armed and naval elements are wholly democratic, says Aristotle. An oligarchy which raises such forces out of the lower classes raises a power against itself. That's what Aristotle said. And I think it's true. The use of cavalry became dominant in Europe between the Hellenistic periods and the Middle Ages. You read the technological changes were immense, including new breeds of horses, all sorts of technical changes in stirrups and saddles, and that made the cavalry more potent. So we get a preeminence of cavalry and large states and elite armies. But from the late Middle Ages to the First World War, freedom reigned in part, because you had the longbow and the short bow, which were wielded by democratic forces, always the Highlanders. The Swiss Highlanders were the bowmen, and the Scots, societies that were free from control by major states. At any rate, this goes on, and by the time of the First World War, you have handguns, you have rifles, you have breached guns, and automatic firing pistols, etc. The unskilled foot soldier became the most lethal force for an army. And in World War I, they started out with cavalry, but they gave up cavalry in the middle of the war and moved to foot soldiers. So what we argued in our book, Democracy and Capitalism, a long time ago, was that democracy in Europe was predicated on the foot soldier and its role in waging war and defending the peace. But, of course, things have changed now. And how do we protect democracy in the future? Well, I'm not sure. Like most people, I would argue that humans tend to prefer democracy, and they're willing to fight and die for it, because we see that around us all the time. The democratic states that exist today were not given to us by aristocrats. They were fought for. Every single one of them was fought for, and they were won through collective mass action, where the elites either lost completely or they realized they had to give up a lot in order to preserve the social structure. That's universal. And it's continuing, as we see now. It's continuing all over the world. And we have new forces that promote democracy. Information technology allows people to coordinate their contestation against despots. So I think that's where we're moving, and the question is, have we abandoned lethal force? Is this no longer the logic that gives us democracy, gives us the political organization of society? So I'm going to stop there, because I could say a lot more about evolution of morality, but I'll stop there because I'd rather take questions.
Sounds like your book with Sam is an argument for the First Amendment, is that right?
And this is not from my book with Sam.
First Amendment or the Second Amendment?
Well, which one is the
Right to bear arms.
Oh, okay, Second Amendment.
Oh, no, I don't support, I never said anything that I support the right to bear arms.
Well, it sounded like that.
Well, I don't say that. I don't take a position on that.
I guess the kind of the light infantry and maybe the handguns were kind of supposed to be the democratizing force. I'm thinking that authoritarian regimes also have the same, kind of lethal technology as democracies do. So how do you say that there's a difference between, democratizing and then, and having those handguns, or say the authoritarian regime also having those handguns, and also like the hoplite armies of ancient Athens, like those were very heavily armed infantry, not light infantry, and that was relatively democratic.
Well, I don't know the second example, because I just don't know that example. you're saying that Aristotle was wrong about that. So I can't.
He's wrong about a lot of things.
Yes, he could be wrong. I just don't have an answer to that. But wait a minute. For the first thing, the era in which European states became democratic, and where it was an era in which there were geopolitical struggles between states, and giving people the vote and representative government was a tool that governments used in order to be able to maintain their political position, their political power, or their war-making power vis-a-vis other European states. I'm not arguing that that's a universal condition that we see even now. You know, I could easily see it's not true. I mean, so I'm just arguing that it was true at a certain point in time.
I was just going to make an observation about the relative to the hoplite armies of Greece and places like that. So that's said to be a transition from bronze weaponry, which is expensive,
right,
to iron, which is much cheaper metal. So there was a democratizing trend that went along with being able to make spear points and armor out of iron rather than bronze, and so that tipped the balance toward these democratic regimes instead.
You know, you have to realize that the first thing of state making in Europe, starting in the 16th century, was the creation of a common culture that people identify by being, you know, French or German or something like that. And the idea of giving arms to members of the population who were not part of the ruling elite was completely insane, until you have people having allegiance to the state, that is, they're going to use that gun in favor of maintaining the power of the state. And that's a very late event, kind of 18th, 19th century event. And even partial. I remember, you know, my grandfather saying the idea, you know, soldat, if my son was going to be a soldier, I'd leave the country. The soldiers are the guys who make us pay the taxes. They're the ones who shoot us. So this was a very late 18th, 19th century phenomenon, and even then very partial in state making.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so the idea of lethal weaponry as a function, as a factor in the absence of hierarchy for hunters and gatherers is a fascinating idea to me, and so this is the first time I hear it. Now, about the rest of human development, historical development, especially since the agricultural revolution and the rise of the state, you gave some emphasis to the role of ideology in the case of democracy and the modern state. But I think it's equally important in previous developments, the ability not just of the technology of conflict, but also the ideological development as a factor in it. What Aristotle said, for example, in the case of light infantry, does not apply to the Aztecs or the Incans, where primarily they had light infantry. They didn't have cavalry, and they still had a very highly centralized system. And part of could be attributed to the ability to have the ideology they had. And the same thing can be said for state development up to the Enlightenment period, where especially with monotheism as a factor, you know, there is a single God, and his single representative on earth is the king or the emperor, as a way of controlling things in addition to technology of conflict. Those two things, the interaction of those things, it's really sort of, we're just starting to learn about those things.
Well, yes, look, I plead ignorance on almost everything. I only started working on this a short time ago. But I think what I said about the role of the handgun, etc., is more particular and more speculative than what I said about the origin of lethal weapons and the political transformation in hunter-gatherer times. And people seem to know more about, I had more people that I could contact who knew about hunter-gatherers, etc., than I did who knew about guns. If I asked people about the evolution of, you know, warfare, they would talk about their grandfather who was, you know, in the Prussian army or something like that. So I think this is very underdeveloped, and I apologize for that.
Okay, back there.
What happens if a lethal weapon stands to mutually assured destruction? A lethal weapon is weakened.
You mean like nuclear power,
Nuclear power,
atomic bombs?
Or if you talk about chiefs, even if one chief assassinates the other, there can be some arrangements to retaliate. Does this make any sense at all?
Well,
lethal weapon just makes the possibility for one person killing the other. But you can think about a stronger form of lethal weapon that also provides an assured retaliation.
Assured retaliation.
That's the blood feud, which is a lot of tribal societies.
A lot of that happens,
The
yeah.
blood feud is as a way of enforcing sort of things, but this free state, I mean, it's not for developed states. It's more tribal.
Yeah,
justice.
for very small scale, I would say, more so. Yeah.
More comments? Well, we are 2 minutes ahead of the schedule, so we can go for lunch. Thank you very much.
Thank you.